My name is Heine Rahman. Jab main peli baras glass building ka revolving doors se and gay thigh. Logon any mooj seriously nahi liya. Intern hi. Temporary hi. Coffee lane wali ladki. Mooj pater teacher main surf internship ka liya nahi a thigh. Main wahan seekni a thigh. Observe Khan. Samajani. Or jab wakte, system ko expose Khan. Unhone Meri Kursi Choti Raki. Main Unka Empire Hyladia. The first time Heine Rahman walked into the executive boardroom, she understood exactly how small they expected her to feel. The room was all glass walls and city views, a skyline that screamed power. A 12-foot mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than her entire college tuition. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. And then there was her seat. Not at the table. Off to the side. A slim chair with a tiny fold-out desk attached to it, the kind meant for observers, not decision-makers. "Ah, the intern," CEO Raza Malik said as he adjusted his cufflinks. He didn't look at her fully. Just a quick glance. A smirk. "Make sure you spell my name correctly in the minutes this time." A few of the executives chuckled. Heine offered a polite smile. "Of course, sir." She opened her laptop. But she wasn't just typing. She was studying. Every interruption. Every deflection. Every number that felt slightly too smooth to be real. The presentation began. Charts appeared on the screen. Bold growth projections, upward trending arrows, applause-worthy forecasts. The board nodded approvingly. But Heine noticed something subtle. Whenever someone asked about vendor costs, the CFO skipped slides. Whenever operating margins were questioned, Raza redirected the conversation toward long-term strategic positioning. The laughter in the room wasn't just casual. It was coordinated comfort. Halfway through the meeting, one of the directors turned to her. "Intern, are you keeping up?" Another ripple of amusement. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I'm keeping track of everything." They didn't hear the weight behind her words. They assumed she was intimidated. They didn't see the way her eyes stayed on the financial breakdown slide 3 seconds longer than everyone else. They didn't notice her fingers pause when a number didn't align with the quarterly summary she had reviewed the night before. To them, she was temporary, disposable, an assistant to the assistant. When the meeting ended, executives stood up discussing golf schedules and weekend retreats. No one asked her opinion. No one cared what she thought. Raza walked past her and added lightly, "Good experience for you. Watch and learn." Heine closed her laptop slowly. Watch and learn. She would. Because what they mistook for silence was calculation. What they mistook for insecurity was patience. And what they dismissed as an intern taking notes was someone quietly building a case. The laughter echoed in her mind as she stepped out of the boardroom. They thought she didn't belong at the table. They had no idea she was about to change who sat at it. The inconsistency started as a whisper in Heine's mind. It wasn't obvious. Not dramatic. Not illegal looking at first glance. Just off. Late one evening, long after most of the executive floor had emptied, Heine remained at her desk. The city lights outside reflected against the glass walls, turning the office into a mirror of quiet ambition. She reopened the quarterly financial report from the board meeting. Revenue growth, 18%. Vendor expenses, strategically optimized. But when she cross-referenced the raw procurement sheet stored in the internal system, something didn't sit right. 3 major vendor payments had increased by nearly 40% over 2 quarters, yet the operational output hadn't changed. Same projects. Same scale. Same timelines. So why the jump? She dug deeper. Vendor A and Vendor C had different names, but identical registration addresses. Vendor B's payment schedule aligned suspiciously close to executive bonus cycles. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a typo. This wasn't rounding error. This was structure. Heine printed the documents and spread them across her desk. She highlighted payment trails, circled dates, drew lines between accounts. The more she mapped it out, the clearer the pattern became, inflated contracts awarded repeatedly to companies that appeared connected. Connected to who? She searched corporate registry records quietly. Public data was often ignored because it required effort. And there it was. A familiar surname tied to one of the vendor directors. Malik. Her breath stilled. It could be coincidence. But coincidences didn't repeat this precisely. The next morning, she attended another strategy briefing. Slides once again showed rising profits and efficient cost restructuring. She looked at Raza across the table. Confident. Relaxed. In control. Did the board know? Or were they seeing the polished version, the simplified version? Heine typed the minutes carefully, but her focus wasn't on grammar. It was on proof. Because numbers rarely lie. People do. And if she was right, the real story of this company wasn't growth. It was concealment. And she had just found the thread that could unravel everything. It happened because of arrogance. That's what Heine would later realize. Power makes people careless. It was nearly 10:40 p.m. The executive floor was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. Heine stayed late under the excuse of organizing minutes, but in truth, she was cross-checking vendor authorizations again. Her inbox pinged. She almost ignored it. Subject line, board pack, final version. It had been forwarded to her by mistake. For a moment, she assumed it was routine. Interns often received files to format or archive. But when she opened the thread, her stomach tightened. It was a private exchange between CEO Raza Malik and the CFO. Raza. Remove the extended vendor breakdown. Board doesn't need that level of detail. CFO. They may ask. Raza. Then we guide the narrative. Send them the simplified sheet. Guide the narrative. Not clarify. Not explain. Guide. Heine scrolled further. Attached was an earlier version of the financial report, one that included vendor ownership structures and comparative expense analysis. The version shown to the board had those pages removed entirely. She felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't oversight. This was deliberate filtration. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind sharpened. She downloaded the attachment immediately and saved a secure copy. Then she screenshot the email thread, including timestamps and internal metadata. She knew one thing clearly. If this disappeared from the system tomorrow, she needed proof it once existed. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Her heart skipped. She quickly minimized her screen. The lights outside Raza's office flicked off. His silhouette moved past the glass wall, phone pressed to his ear, laughing casually, unaware that the very thread meant to protect him had slipped. Heine exhaled slowly after he left. She reopened the email. Board doesn't need that level of detail. No. They needed it more than ever. This wasn't about ambition anymore. It wasn't even about being underestimated. This was about accountability. About shareholders trusting numbers that had been curated instead of disclosed. Heine leaned back in her chair, staring at the city skyline. They thought she was invisible. Tonight, invisibility had given her access. And Raza Malik had just handed her the piece of evidence that could change everything. The shift in atmosphere was subtle. No one accused her of anything. No one confronted her directly. But the air around Heine changed. It started when she asked a simple question during a finance sync meeting. Can someone clarify why vendor CS contract extension bypassed competitive bidding? The room stilled. Not dramatically, just enough. The CFO glanced at Raza before answering. Strategic partnership. Long-term value alignment. It sounded polished. Prepared. Heine nodded slowly. Understood. Was the alignment documented in the procurement file? I couldn't locate the justification memo. A pause. This time, the smile on Raza's face didn't reach his eyes. You're very thorough for an intern, he said lightly. But some decisions operate at a level beyond your access. Soft laughter again. But it wasn't as relaxed as before. Later that afternoon, HR called her in. The tone was friendly. Too friendly. We've received feedback that you've been intensely reviewing sensitive materials, the HR manager said. We love curiosity, but interns are here to observe, not audit. Heine folded her hands calmly. I was only cross-referencing documents assigned to me. Of course, HR replied quickly. We just want to ensure you're focused on learning, not creating unnecessary friction. Unnecessary friction. That phrase stayed with her. Because friction only happens when something resists pressure. When she returned to her desk, her system access had been subtly adjusted. Certain procurement folders now required higher authorization. A coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone had noticed. That evening, as employees filtered out, Raza walked past her desk. Ambition is good, he said casually, stopping just long enough for her to feel the weight of it. But timing matters. Don't burn bridges before you even have a career. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Heine met his gaze steadily. I'm just trying to understand the business, sir. He smiled thinly. Understand what you're meant to. After he left, Heine stared at her screen. They were nervous. Not panicked, not yet, but aware. And that meant she was close. She realized something important that night. The moment powerful people try to limit your access, it's because you've touched something real. They thought reducing her permissions would slow her down. They didn't realize she had already downloaded what she needed. And now, this wasn't about asking questions anymore. It was about choosing the right moment to ask them publicly. Moment to ask them public. The replies didn't flood in all at once. They came cautiously. One investor requested a private call. Another asked for additional documentation. A third simply wrote, if this is accurate, we have a serious governance issue. Heine expected skepticism. She welcomed it. Because serious investors didn't react emotionally, they reacted to evidence. Over the next week, she worked with precision. She compiled a structured file, vendor payment comparisons across 3 quarters, highlighted discrepancies, corporate registry links showing shared addresses, and the now critical email thread instructing the simplified board version. She wasn't presenting suspicion. She was presenting pattern. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, she had her third call with a long-time minority shareholder, an older investor who had supported the company since its early days. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long pause. If management filtered material information from the board, he said slowly, that's not strategy. That's exposure. Yes, Heine replied calmly. And exposure becomes risk. 2 days later, she crossed the required ownership threshold. 5%. That was all the bylaws required. Clause 7.3. She drafted the formal notice with legal counsel. Subject: Petition for Extraordinary Shareholder Meeting, Audit and Governance Review. The document cited corporate governance obligations, fiduciary duties, and material disclosure standards. It was professional, precise, unemotional. At 9:02 a.m., the notice was officially filed. At 9:07 a.m., the executive floor felt different. Assistants began whispering. Phones rang more urgently than usual. The legal department requested internal document access logs. At 9:21 a.m., Raza Malik stepped out of his office holding a printed copy of the petition. His expression was controlled. Too controlled. Who initiated this? Someone asked quietly in the hallway. His eyes scanned the page again. Then he saw the name. Petitioner. Heine Rahman. Intern. Shareholder. He looked across the open floor, and for the first time, he didn't look amused. Heine didn't avoid his gaze. She met it calmly. No sarcasm now. No smirk. No laughter. Just realization. The mechanism they assumed no one would ever use had just been activated. And the meeting that was meant to protect his authority might be the one that ended itly. The replies didn't flood in all at once. They came cautiously. One investor requested a private call. Another asked for additional documentation. A third simply wrote, if this is accurate, we have a serious governance issue. Heine expected skepticism. She welcomed it. Because serious investors didn't react emotionally, they reacted to evidence. Over the next week, she worked with precision. She compiled a structured file, vendor payment comparisons across 3 quarters, highlighted discrepancies, corporate registry links showing shared addresses, and the now critical email thread instructing the simplified board version. She wasn't presenting suspicion. She was presenting pattern. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, she had her third call with a long-time minority shareholder, an older investor who had supported the company since its early days. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long pause. If management filtered material information from the board, he said slowly, that's not strategy. That's exposure. Yes, Heine replied calmly. And exposure becomes risk. 2 days later, she crossed the required ownership threshold. 5%. That was all the bylaws required. Clause 7.3. She drafted the formal notice with legal counsel. Subject: Petition for Extraordinary Shareholder Meeting, Audit and Governance Review. The document cited corporate governance obligations, fiduciary duties, and material disclosure standards. It was professional, precise, unemotional. At 9:02 a.m., the notice was officially filed. At 9:07 a.m., the executive floor felt different. Assistants began whispering. Phones rang more urgently than usual. The legal department requested internal document access logs. At 9:21 a.m., Raza Malik stepped out of his office holding a printed copy of the petition. His expression was controlled. Too controlled. Who initiated this? Someone asked quietly in the hallway. His eyes scanned the page again. Then he saw the name. Petitioner. Heine Rahman. Intern. Shareholder. He looked across the open floor, and for the first time, he didn't look amused. Heine didn't avoid his gaze. She met it calmly. No sarcasm now. No smirk. No laughter. Just realization. The mechanism they assumed no one would ever use had just been activated. And the meeting that was meant to protect his authority might be the one that ended it. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. Unlike regular board meetings, this one felt different from the moment people entered the hall. It wasn't just executives this time, it was investors, legal advisors, compliance officers, and independent observers. The atmosphere wasn't relaxed. It was cautious. Raza Malik stood near the front, speaking quietly with the CFO. His posture was confident, but his jaw was tight. He had likely spent the past 48 hours preparing a defense strategy. At 10:03 a.m., the meeting officially began. An extraordinary shareholder meeting has been called under Clause 7.3, the corporate secretary announced. The petitioner will present the basis for review. There was a murmur in the room. Most people expected a senior investor to stand. Instead, Heine rose from the third row. A few heads turned sharply. Confusion flickered across faces. The intern. She walked calmly to the front, her laptop in hand. No hesitation. No theatrics. My name is Heine Rahman, she began steadily. I am a registered minority shareholder. She paused deliberately. And yes, I'm also the intern. The projector screen lit up. Slide 1. Vendor payment growth comparison. Slide 2. Registry address overlaps. Slide 3. Timeline correlation between bonus cycles and vendor increases. The room grew quieter with each slide. Then came the email. She didn't dramatize it. She simply displayed it. Remove the extended vendor breakdown. Board doesn't need that level of detail. A few investors shifted in their seats. Raza finally stood. This is a misinterpretation of internal discussion, he said smoothly. Operational simplification is common practice. Heine nodded calmly. Simplification becomes material omission when information relevant to governance oversight is withheld. No anger in her voice. Just clarity. An independent board member leaned forward. Was the extended vendor disclosure intentionally excluded from the official board pack? The CFO hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. For the first time since she joined the company, There was no laughter in the room. No dismissive smiles. No sarcastic remarks. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when power shifts. Raza looked at Heine again, but this time, not as an intern. As a threat. And everyone in that room understood something at the exact same moment. This meeting wasn't routine. It was historic. And the person who had just changed the direction of the company had once been asked to take notes quietly in the corner. The silence after the CFO's hesitation felt heavier than any accusation. No one needed dramatic confrontation anymore. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt was dangerous. An independent director cleared his throat. Given the material presented, I propose an immediate independent forensic audit of vendor relationships and executive disclosures. The words landed like a controlled explosion. Raza stepped forward quickly. This is unnecessary escalation. Internal review mechanisms already exist. Internal mechanisms overseen by the same leadership under review, another shareholder responded calmly. The room was no longer aligned behind him. It was evaluating him. Heine stood quietly to the side now. She had said what she needed to say. The evidence was no longer hers alone, it belonged to the shareholders. Legal counsel outlined the motion formally. An independent third-party audit firm will be appointed. Access to financial records and executive correspondence will be granted without restriction. Vote required by majority of represented shares. Raza's composure thinned slightly. This sends a message of instability to the market, he warned. Our stock will suffer. An older investor replied evenly, lack of transparency harms value more than transparency ever will. Murmurs of agreement followed. The corporate secretary began the vote. Electronic panels lit up across the room. Approve audit. Reject audit. A pause. Even Heine felt her pulse in her fingertips. She wasn't nervous about the evidence. She was aware of what this meant. If the vote failed, she would return to being just the intern, likely not for long. If it passed, there was no going back. Results began appearing on the central screen. 45%. 52%. 68%. The majority threshold was crossed decisively. Audit approved. The decision was final. No applause. No dramatic gasps. Just a quiet shift in posture across the room, the kind that happens when leadership authority cracks. Raza stood motionless for a moment, absorbing it. The vote didn't declare him guilty, but it declared him vulnerable. And in corporate power structures, vulnerability is the beginning of the end. Heine didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply gathered her laptop calmly. Because this was never about revenge. It was about accountability. And the shareholders had just chosen transparency over loyalty. The empire hadn't fallen yet. But the foundation had officially been inspected. And everyone in that room knew something important. Once an independent audit begins, it rarely ends quietly. The audit firm was appointed within 48 hours. By Monday morning, external forensic accountants occupied a glass conference room on the executive floor. Laptops open. Document requests sent. Access logs pulled. The atmosphere inside the company shifted from controlled confidence to contained anxiety. Employees whispered in hallways. Legal teams worked late. Raza Malik still walked the floor, still issued directives, but something had changed. He was no longer untouchable. 3 weeks into the audit, the requests grew more specific. Vendor ownership disclosures. Internal approval chains. Email recovery from archived servers. The CFO stopped attending daily briefings. Stock prices dipped slightly, not dramatically, but noticeably enough to spark financial press interest. Then came the headline. Tech firm under independent governance review following shareholder petition. The article didn't mention Heine by name, but it mentioned a minority shareholder invoking clause-based authority. Inside the building, everyone knew who that was. One Thursday afternoon, an emergency executive session was called, without interns, without assistants, without observers. Heine wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. An hour later, the announcement was sent company-wide. Subject: Leadership Update. Raza Malik had resigned, effective immediately. The statement was carefully worded. After thoughtful discussion and in the best interest of the company's continued stability, Mr. Malik has decided to step down for personal reasons. Personal reasons. Not audit findings. Not misconduct. Corporate language was always polite. But those who understood governance knew what it meant. Resign before the report becomes public. Leave before removal becomes mandatory. By the end of the day, his office was cleared. No dramatic farewell. No press conference. Just a quiet departure through a private exit. Heine watched from her desk as the news circulated across financial platforms. She felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only a steady confirmation of what she had believed from the beginning. Power built on filtered information cannot survive full transparency. Later that evening, as most employees left, an independent board member approached her desk. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. She nodded. "I just followed the bylaws." He gave a small, knowing smile. "No," he replied. "You followed accountability." The intern they once mocked had triggered the most significant leadership change in the company's history. And she had done it without raising her voice once. 3 months later, the company looked the same from the outside. Same glass building. Same skyline reflection. Same logo rotating in the lobby. But inside, the culture had shifted. The independent audit report was finalized. While it avoided sensational headlines, it confirmed material disclosure gaps and governance oversight failures. Policies were revised. Procurement protocols were tightened. Board reporting standards were restructured. Transparency was no longer optional. It was mandatory. An interim CEO had been appointed, someone known for operational discipline rather than charisma. The board formed a governance and ethics committee to prevent future blind spots. And then, quietly, an email arrived in Heine's inbox. Subject: Committee appointment invitation. She read it twice. The board was offering her a non-executive seat on the newly established Governance and Strategy Committee, representing minority shareholders. Not because she was loud. Not because she was dramatic. But because she had demonstrated something rare. Courage backed by evidence. The first time she entered the boardroom again, the seating arrangement was different. No folding chair. No side desk. Her nameplate was placed directly at the table. Heine Rahman. Shareholder representative. There were no sarcastic remarks this time. No dismissive smiles. The interim CEO began the meeting formally. "Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the governance reforms initiated through shareholder action. They've strengthened this company." It wasn't applause. It was recognition. As discussions unfolded, Heine contributed, calmly, strategically. She asked clear questions about vendor transparency, suggested independent oversight triggers, proposed disclosure benchmarks tied to executive compensation. Not aggressive, just firm. Later that afternoon, as the meeting adjourned, a new intern approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Rahman, I've read about what happened," the young woman said softly. "Any advice?" Heine smiled, remembering her own first day. "Observe everything," she said. "Learn the rules. And never assume your position defines your influence." The intern nodded, inspired. As Heine stepped out of the boardroom, she paused for a moment. They once believed she didn't belong at the table. Now she helped decide who did. And the most powerful thing about her rise: she didn't take power. She earned the right to hold it accountable.